You really have to hear what this man encountered. What Marcus Tillett is about to describe took place in the autumn of 2014, deep inside the interior of George Washington National Forest in Western Virginia. He went in with 3 colleagues. He came out alone. One body was eventually recovered. One was not. One person survived beyond that October in body, but not, by any account, in the way she had been before. The official report filed by the United States Forest Service calls it a terrain accident and exposure. It does not explain why the medical examiner found no identifiable cause of death in the recovered body of a man in good cardiovascular health. It does not explain what the pathologist noted in a supplementary memo, that the tissue presented in a state inconsistent with exposure, inconsistent with cardiac event, inconsistent with any physiological process the examiner had previously documented in 22 years of practice. The official report does not explain that at all. It does not try. What comes next is the account. My name is Marcus Tillett. I am 44 years old. I have been a wildlife biologist with the United States Forest Service, Blue Ridge District, for 17 years. I was born in Covington, Virginia, 11 miles from the western boundary of this forest. I grew up with it. I surveyed my first interior transect at 19 years old as a seasonal volunteer. I have spent, by my own rough estimate, somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 nights in American wilderness over the course of my career. The majority of those nights were in George Washington National Forest specifically. Nothing had ever frightened me in that forest. That changed in the Paddy Run corridor in October of 2014. I want to say one thing before I go further. I am not a person given to interpretation. My training is observational. I document what I see. I measure. I report. Everything I am about to tell you is what I saw and what I measured and what the physical record confirms. I am not asking you to believe anything beyond the documentation. The documentation is enough. There were 4 of us on that survey. The assignment was a habitat assessment of the eastern limestone ridge system in the Paddy Run drainage, an interior section of the forest that had not received a formal wildlife survey in 9 years. Standard 3 to 4 day trip. We had done dozens of them. Dana Rourke was 29. She had been with the Forest Service for 2 years, assigned to our district in the spring of that year. She was good in the field, careful, precise, never needed reminding about protocol. She had a habit of photographing everything she found unusual and building small personal field catalogs on her own time. She was the newest member of the crew. Phil Garner was 52, senior surveyor, 24 years with the USFS, the last 11 in the Blue Ridge District. He had forgotten more about Appalachian forest systems than most people in this field will ever know. He was the authority on that team in every sense. When Phil made a call, you followed it because in 24 years Phil's calls had been right far more often than they had been wrong. He was the kind of man you trusted without having to think about it. Lena Marsh was 37. She was a contracted wildlife photographer, not a USFS employee, brought in specifically for this survey because the district wanted documentation of any evidence of timber rattlesnake corridor use along the eastern ridge. Lena had worked with us on 2 previous surveys, and she was, without any competition, the person on that team that the rest of us would have chosen to spend 3 days in the woods with. She knew when to be quiet. She knew when to push back. She had a laugh that made a hard day shorter. Phil had nicknamed her the ambassador because she could smooth over anything. I want you to know who they were before I tell you what happened to them. The Paddy Run corridor sits in the Shenandoah section of George Washington National Forest, southwest of Strasburg, Virginia. The trailhead access is off State Route 675. From that point, the interior survey area we were assigned sat 31 miles from the nearest paved road. The closest staffed ranger station was 19 miles from our base camp location. The drainage itself is a valley cut by the Paddy Run stream system moving through a limestone karst substrate, porous rock, fractured over centuries, full of interior cavities that open into overhangs and shallow cave formations along the eastern ridge face. Those formations had never been formally surveyed. They were on our list. The eastern ridge was the specific reason the district wanted eyes on this section. The forest in that corridor is dense second-growth hardwood canopy. Red oak, tulip poplar, white ash. growing thick enough that by mid-October you are already walking in near darkness by 4 in the afternoon. The valley floor is narrow. The ridge walls press in on both sides. There is one stream crossing and no alternate route in or out. You go in through Paddy Run and you come out through Paddy Run. That is the geography. I want it on record before anything else. We arrived at base camp on the afternoon of October 8th. We set up before dark. The first thing I noticed was the birds. There were none. That is not an exaggeration. A mature Appalachian hardwood forest in early October is one of the noisiest environments in eastern North America. White throathead sparrows, dark-eyed juncos, yellow-rumped warblers moving through on migration. The canopy should have been constant sound. Within a half-mile radius of the eastern ridge, there was nothing. No insect noise either. No squirrel activity. No deer sign on any of the creek bank mud where you would expect tracks by the dozens. I noted it in my field log and said nothing to the group yet. The following morning, Dana found the boot prints. They were in the creek mud at the lower crossing, human-sized, adult male by the depth and spacing, walking upstream toward the eastern ridge. She called me over and we followed them. The stride was regular. The depth was consistent. The prints continued for 40 feet past the creek bank, moving onto a shelf of exposed limestone. And then they stopped. Not faded out. Not obscured. They stopped. The final impression was a full left foot strike, weight transferred forward, the way a walking person's final track step looks just before they step onto hard ground. Except there was no hard ground. The surface ahead was soft forest duff. There should have been more prints. There were none. Dana photographed the sequence. She did not say anything. I did not say anything. Phil looked at the sequence and said the person probably moved onto rock and we lost them. He was not wrong to say it. It was a reasonable read. But there was no rock. 20 minutes further up the drainage, on a limestone shelf approximately 4 feet off the creek floor, we found a single hiking boot, laces still tied, sitting upright. The boot was a men's size 11 Danner Mountain Light in tan leather. It was not weathered. It had not been there long. There was nothing else. No second boot. No pack. No clothing. No indication of a person in any direction. Phil called it in to the district radio. We logged it and continued. We were there to work. I have thought about that boot every single day since October of 2014. Not because of what it was. Because of how it was placed. Upright. Precise. Like someone had set it there deliberately, with care, the way you set something down when you want it to be found. The first night was quiet until it was not. We had the campfire down by 9 and were intense by 9:30. I was in my bag but not yet asleep when I heard the movement along the western tree line. Not in the tree line, along it. Something moving parallel to camp at a height I could not account for. I estimated the sound origin at approximately 9 feet off the ground. It was not the sound of branches breaking. Branches were not breaking. Whatever was moving through that corridor was moving without contact with the canopy. I lay still and listened for 4 minutes. Then the sound stopped. What followed was not quiet. I want to be precise about this because people use the word quiet to mean the absence of noise, and that is not what I mean. What followed was the removal of all ambient sound, as though something had pressed a hand over the ear of the forest. The creek was still audible. Wind was not present. But the background texture of sound that a healthy forest makes, the settling, the insects, the random motion, that was gone. Completely and instantly gone. I have spent thousands of nights outdoors. I know the difference between late-night natural quiet and this. This was not natural. In the morning, I walked the camp perimeter. There were no tracks. No impressions of any kind outside the boundary of what we ourselves had made. But every piece of equipment we had left outside, the bear canister, the water filter, the folded rainfly, had been repositioned. Not moved significantly. Rotated. Each item turned to face the eastern ridge. The angle was consistent across all 3 items. I estimated 15 to 20 degrees of rotation. Precise. Uniform. Phil said we must have done it ourselves and not remembered. I did not argue with him. I wrote it in my field log. Dana was gone from her tent at 3:14 in the morning on October 10th. I know the time because Lena heard her tent zipper at 3:14 and noted it on her watch, assuming Dana was making a bathroom run. When Dana had not returned by 3:45, Lena woke me. We woke Phil. Dana's sleeping bag was empty. It was still zipped from the outside. Her boots were outside the tent door. Both of them, parallel, side by side, 6 inches apart, the toes pointed toward the eastern ridge. We searched with headlamps until dawn. Lena stayed at camp. Phil and I moved up the drainage calling Dana's name. At the creek crossing, in the gray light of early morning, I found her standing at the water's edge facing the eastern ridge. She was not moving. She did not respond to her name. I touched her shoulder and she did not react for several seconds. When she finally turned, her eyes were focused and present. She was not in distress. She was not cold. Her core temperature, when I checked it, was normal. She had no memory of leaving the tent. She had no memory of the 4 hours between 3:14 a.m. and dawn. That night, in the tent, she told me in a low voice that she had seen something in the upper overhang formations when we had surveyed the ridge face that afternoon. She could not describe it clearly. She said it had been watching the team for a long time before any of us arrived. She said it already knew her name. She did not say this in the way a frightened person says something. She said it the way a person reports a measurement. Flat, certain, finished. Dana Rourke did not sleep again on that trip. Phil decided on the morning of October 11th that he was going to inspect the cave formations himself. I argued against it. I told him we had enough for the report, that the formations could be flagged for a future caving certified crew. He said we were there, the gear was adequate, and the district was not going to send another team to this corridor for another 9 years. He was not wrong about that either. Phil was rarely wrong about logistics. We divided to cover more ground along the lower ridge. Phil moved toward the upper overhang access. Lena and I worked the lower transect. Dana sat at base camp. She had asked to stay and neither of us pushed back. We were 40 minutes into the lower transect when Lena stopped walking. She put a hand up. She was listening. From the direction of the upper overhang, coming from 2 points simultaneously, east and northeast, separated by what I estimated as 60 to 80 feet of lateral distance, we heard Dana's voice, calling Phil's name, calmly, repeatedly, from 2 directions at once. I turned back toward base camp immediately. Lena followed. Dana was at base camp. She had not moved. She had not called anyone. She had been sitting with her field notebook open when we came back through the trees. We could not raise Phil on the radio. We searched until 4 in the afternoon. We found his pack. We found his radio, turned off, sitting on a rock shelf outside the upper overhang entrance. His notes were inside the pack. The last entry was a bearing reading logged at 10:47 a.m. Routine, nothing unusual. He had not written anything about what he saw inside. Phil Garner did not come back out of that corridor. We began the evacuation at 4:15. Moving fast, moving light, 31 miles back to the trailhead. Lena was ahead of me. She knew the route. She had her pack and her camera and she was moving well. At the creek crossing, she stopped. She did not trip. She did not fall. She stopped the way a person stops when they hear their name called by someone they recognize. She turned. She turned toward the eastern ridge. I was 10 feet behind her and I said her name and she did not look at me. She looked at the tree line above the eastern ridge face. For a long moment she stood there. Then she walked into the trees. I called her name. I called it many times. I did not follow her past the tree line. I cannot explain the decision not to follow her except to say that everything I understood about what was happening in that corridor told me that following her was what it wanted me to do. I crossed the creek. I walked 31 miles. I reached the trailhead at 11:40 p.m. I was alone. I survived because it already had what it came for. That is the part that stays with me. Not the grief, though the grief is there every morning when I wake up. What stays with me is the certainty, the cold, settled certainty, that it did not take me because it was finished. Not because I was fast. Not because I was lucky. Because it had made a decision, and I was not part of that decision. The United States Forest Service filed Closure Report IR 2014-0447 on November 3, 2014. It cited terrain accident and exposure as contributing factors in the disappearance of Philip Garner and Lena Marsh. It attributed Phil's eventual recovery. His body was found on November 29 in a lower section of the Paddy Run drainage by a search team to cardiac arrest. The medical examiner's official report listed the cause of death as cardiac arrhythmia, acute onset. Phil was 52. He had passed a full USFS physical in March of 2014. His cardiovascular profile was, in the examining physician's own words in the March report, unremarkable for his age in the best sense of the word. In a supplementary internal memo dated December 12, 2014, the state medical examiner noted that the tissue presentation in the recovered body was inconsistent with standard post-mortem decomposition timeline, inconsistent with known cardiac failure pathology, and inconsistent with any cause of death the examiner could document with confidence. That memo was not included in the public closure report. I obtained a copy through a public records request in February of 2015. The request took 4 months to process. The memo was released with 3 sections redacted. Dana Rourke resigned from the Forest Service on December 5, 2014. She relocated out of Virginia. She has not returned to the state. Lena Marsh's name does not appear anywhere in Closure Report IR 2014-0447. It appears only in the original October 7th survey manifest as a contracted personnel entry. In the official record, she was there and then she was not there, and there is no explanation bridging those two facts. In the spring of 2015, I started pulling records. Not because I expected to find anything, because I needed to understand whether what happened to us had happened before. In August of 1987, a geological survey team working the Paddy Run limestone karst system filed a report with the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals and Energy describing large bipedal impressions in a clay deposit near the eastern ridge face. The impressions were documented. Casts were made. The report was filed. 2 months later, the report was reclassified as non-public under a resource protection designation. I found a reference to it in a 1991 academic paper on Appalachian karst geology that cited the 1987 report before the reclassification. The citation is the only public trace. In July of 1961, a timber crew of 6 men working the Paddy Run drainage under a USFS harvesting permit lost 1 man to what the foreman recorded as unexplained disappearance. The man was not found. The foreman's daily log, held in the district archive, contains 1 entry from July 22 that reads, "Emmett gone. No sign. No sound. Boys won't go back up the east side. The harvest contract was terminated." No further explanation is in the file. In the summer of 1931, a civilian Conservation Corps crew assigned to trail construction in the Paddy Run corridor was removed from the site after 3 crew members refused to re-enter the woods following an overnight incident. The crew supervisor, a man named Hugh Ambrose, filed a written report that was forwarded to the district office and eventually deposited in the National Archives. I found it on a research visit to the archives in College Park in March of 2015. Ambrose wrote, "There is a presence in the upper rock faces that watches the men. It does not move when observed. Selects. I do not know what it selects for, but it is not random. Thompson and Earl and Walls will not go back, and I will not order them. We are pulling the crew." The summer of 1931 to October of 2014. 83 years. The same drainage. The same ridge. The same described behavior. Nobody connected the cases until I sat in a reading room in College Park with a photocopy of Hugh Ambrose's handwriting and understood that I was not the first person to come out of that corridor with the same question and no answer. I had not told anyone outside the formal inquiry process about what happened in October of 2014 when, in the spring of 2015, I received a phone call from a man named Raymond Adkins. Raymond Adkins was 71 years old. He was a member of the Patawomek Band of the Powhatan Confederacy from the Chickahominy River community in King William County. He told me he had read about the search operation in the local news coverage from November of 2014. He told me he had been waiting to see if anyone came forward with a particular kind of account before he decided to make contact. We spoke for 2 hours. He told me the creature is called, in the old language of his people, Amancatia. The translation he offered was approximate. He was careful to say that, but he rendered it as the one who measures worth. He told me it does not feed in any way his people understand feeding. It nests in the high limestone overhangs in the interior ridge systems. It has nested in the Paddy Run corridor, to his knowledge, for as long as his family's oral record extends, which he placed at a minimum of 12 generations. He told me it takes people. He told me it does not take randomly. He said the selection has a pattern that his people understand but that he found difficult to put into English in a way that would make sense to someone outside that framework. What he said, as closely as I can render it, was this: it takes people who carry something it recognizes as belonging to the space it holds. He did not elaborate and I did not press him. He told me his grandfather had warned the family never to enter the Paddy Run corridor. He said the family had honored that. They still do. Before he ended the call, he said one more thing. He said, the ones it does not take, it has also made a decision about. He said that should not feel like luck to me. I have spent 6 years thinking about what he meant by that. George Washington National Forest is open to the public. The Paddy Run trail system is listed on the USFS website as a moderate difficulty hiking route, suitable for experienced day hikers and overnight campers. It receives several hundred visitors each year. The vast majority of them complete the trail without incident. They see deer, they hear birds, they camp by the creek and they leave. But there are certain conditions. Late season surveys. Solo overnight camps on the eastern side of the drainage. The interior corridor in October specifically, when the canopy thins and the ridge face becomes visible from the valley floor for the first time since spring. When the overhangs can see down into the creek. When whatever is up there can see you clearly. If you are planning to walk that trail, most days you will be fine. Most days nothing will happen. But if you camp on the east side of the drainage in late October, within 2 miles of the limestone ridge face, you should know this. The silence, when it comes, will feel like something pressing against your ears from inside. Not outside. Inside. And if you hear a voice you recognize coming from 2 directions at the same time, do not try to locate it. Do not move toward either source. Do not cross the creek toward the tree line. And if someone you are with stops walking and turns toward the ridge, call their name once. Only once. If they do not turn back to you on that first call, you leave. You leave without them. You do not follow. I know how that sounds. I know what it costs to say it. Lena Marsh was my colleague and my friend, and I left her at a creek crossing in the dark because something in me understood, at a depth below reasoning, that following her was not going to bring her back. It was only going to mean that nobody came back. I survived because it already had what it came for. That is the part that keeps me awake at night.